Welcome. I'm Ben Boyce, and this is the Dr. Junkie Show, where I untangle, unpack, and undo cultural myths around drugs, addictions, and the system that keeps the war on drugs alive. I'll update y'all on some housekeeping stuff at the end of this episode, but for those who are ready to dive into a story about the guy most commonly known for saying we all want to fuck our parents, and he wasn't entirely wrong, by the way, let's do it. I'm your host, Ben Boyce, recovering addicted person, academic, harm reductionist, prison educator, guy that likes to go fast, and lifelong big mouth haver. Today we're diving into a subject that most psych students have at least heard of, but that few people have really explored all that much: Sigmund Freud's love affair with cocaine. That's right, the father of psychoanalysis, Oedipus complexes, dream interpretations, slips of the tongue, neurosis. That guy loved cocaine. Like, he loved it so much that he would give it to his friends and family members at the holidays. Merry Christmas, Ma. He wrote literal love letters to the stuff. Okay, I've done that too. He suggested it to his patients, and he once actually told one of his friends who was addicted to injecting morphine that he should use cocaine to get off morphine. No surprise that that didn't help to kick the opioids, but it did leave him addicted to both drugs. His friend died a few months later, and it was one of the few times Freud seemed to really struggle with cocaine, because he wasn't living in a time like ours, a time when cocaine has a big, public, scary story. He was living at a time when cocaine had no story. He was actually writing some of the first stories about it, and for him, for the most part, these were happy stories, energetic stories, sexually charged stories. He didn't understand set and setting enough to fully grasp that everyone is different when it comes to how they experience a drug like cocaine. So let's talk about what cocaine meant to Freud, what it means for us, and why the way we talk about drugs, even in academic history, why it's still shaped by social stigmas in the social construction of particular drugs. So it's 1880 in Europe. You've got a 28-year-old Sigmund Freud, up-and-coming neurologist, living in Vienna, making it big. And he's kind of stressed. His dad just died, he's working mad hours, and morphine is everywhere. At this point, it's used for everything, from toothaches to existential dread, or just to put your kids to sleep. Morphine. Anyway, enter cocaine, which has actually been around for more than 20 years at this point. Actually, it's been around for like 6,000 plus years at this point in coca plants, which were chewed by indigenous peoples in South America because they had some stimulating effects and they helped them breathe easier at high elevations. But in 1859, a dude named Albert Niemann isolated the active alkaloid in the coca plant, what we now call cocaine, or cocaine hydrochloride, and he wrote about its numbing effects on the tongue, the old number as we call it nowadays when you smear cocaine on your gums. And it was just a number of chemicals that pharmacists were cooking up at that time, trying to make some money in the growing patent medicine industry. Now, from what we know, Freud first tried coke in 1884. At the time, this wasn't some shady back alley deal. It was a legit medicine. Pharmacies carried it. Doctors recommended it. Hell, it was marketed as a tonic for, well, same as for morphine, for everything. For fatigue, indigestion, depression, impotence, treatment for opium addiction, pain relief for little kids as their teeth grew in. Everything. So Freud does what any ambitious 19th century nerd would have done after doing a bunch of blow. He starts writing mad academic papers about how much he loves this drug. His most famous was called On Coca, or Uber Coca, very original, and in it, he calls cocaine a magical substance. He says it gives him energy, confidence, relief from depression. He literally writes, quote, "A small dose lifted me to the heights in a wonderful fashion." And he claims it doesn't cause any urge to use more. In fact, he says that after a few lines, it makes him feel like he doesn't want to use any more. It makes you kind of wonder what kind of cocaine they were sending him. But remember, the social stories we have about a drug and the social setting in which we use it, those things shape our experience on that drug. Freud wasn't wading through a century of stereotypical lies and a neoliberal hellscape that trained him that everything can be solved with a purchase, so maybe that's why his experience was so different than many people talk about today. Regardless, he gets all blow-faced and he writes this paper, which is now part of a book, Uber Coca, where he claims it's a magical superdrug with no downsides. Yeah, we all know that guy. Now, here's where it gets real. Freud starts promoting cocaine not just for his use, but for all the stuff I mentioned before, including morphine addiction, which is a terrible idea, because now you've got people trying to switch out one physically addictive substance for another. And since these two drugs work on somewhat different systems in the brain, they often wound up just adding cocaine to their problems. And here we should probably zoom out a little bit. See, Freud's relationship with cocaine isn't just some embarrassing footnote to history. It's actually a mirror. It's a reflection of how medicine and society decided, and how they continue to decide, which drugs are acceptable and which ones aren't. Cocaine wasn't fully classified either way at first. There were people praising it, and there were people condemning it. In the 1880s, it wasn't illegal. It was actually considered high-tech, as weird as that might sound to us, cutting edge. Rich people used it a lot. Lots of doctors other than Freud prescribed it to their patients. Bored or depressed people could often go to the local grocery store and use it as a pick-me-up. So Freud was just riding this wave. But by the early 1900s, as I've talked about a ton on this show, everything started to change in the United States. The racialized drug panic in the U.S. kicked into high gear, and all of a sudden politicians were linking cocaine to black men, violence, madness, insanity. Cocaine is actually the reason police departments in the South switched to using larger caliber pistols in the 1900s, under the false belief that cocaine could make black men bulletproof. So the narrative shifted a ton, and it shifted really fast from cocaine being seen as a medical miracle of sorts to its current status as a public menace. And in the process, Freud's cocaine history? Gone. Mostly. It's scrubbed. It's sanitized. A lot of it's completely forgotten. He actually seems to have destroyed a bunch of stuff that he wrote down about it, which, again, I can kind of relate to as someone who's gone on a multi-day cocaine binge where I wrote what felt like the most deep philosophical shit while I was on it that turned out to be gibberish when I read it a few days later. So the War on Drugs 1.0. It begins in what we've talked about before is the cult of pharmacology. It suddenly decides that this miracle drug, this thing it had considered an angel, is now a curse. It's a demon. Cocaine is moved from acceptable to criminal. Sound familiar again? Yeah, this is the same playbook we still use today. A drug gets popular, somebody makes a bunch of money on it, and then we criminalize it when the wrong people start using it, or at least a certain group of people can be scapegoated for harms related to their use of it, and or when the wrong people start making money on it, the cartels instead of the pharmaceutical industry. It's no accident that most of Freud's early cocaine experiments get left out of Psych 101 classes and textbooks, because if we actually talked about it, we'd have to admit that drug use, even kind of problematic drug use, and in Freud's case it sometimes was, it doesn't always ruin lives. Sometimes it launches careers, it inspires books, it presses people to make their dreams reality. I know drugs have done a ton for me. They've helped me write books, they kicked off this podcast, they got me through my PhD, they inspire me all the time. And I'm on a tangent. So Freud goes on to shape psychiatry for the next 100 years, cocaine use and all. He was literally high on cocaine when he developed the foundations of psychoanalysis, which, despite having some pretty kooky ideas, are actually still a pretty reliable framework for therapy. But his ideas about cocaine? Poof. Those are divorced from his psychoanalysis in a culture that continues to treat drug users like we're broken, diseased, criminals. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to go to your therapist and do some blow while you tell them what's really bugging you? Not possible anymore, at least not for now. I love talking about Freud's history of drug use because it forces us to recognize both the important contributions of drug users throughout history and the selective wipe of certain histories that have been removed from textbooks and PBS-style stories. Drugs are just tools that can heal, harm, help, destroy, connect us, isolate us, energize us, or completely numb us. Freud wasn't a junkie or a criminal. Like all of us, he was a person, a flawed, brilliant, anxious, grieving, experimenting, kinda weird human being who smoked way too many cigars. They gave him throat cancer that eventually led to his death, and who eventually died the way that I hope I can die someday, of a morphine overdose administered by a doctor who agreed to help him die once he was old, gray, sick, and had done everything he wanted to do with his life. He went out on his terms. It's a cool little bonus story about Freud, compassionate death by overdose. If we really want a more compassionate, more honest approach to drug policy, we have to start with stories like Freud's, and we have to tell the truth about him and the millions of others who also enjoy intoxication today and in the past. At the same time as Freud was hosing up his pharmaceutical cocaine, it was also in Coca-Cola. The Pope was drinking wine with cocaine in it. And alcohol mixed with cocaine actually makes it more potent. If we want to fix the damage done by the war on drugs, we've got to start with destigmatization of the use of drugs. Because the truth is, people use drugs for a reason. Even Freud. I'd have loved to sit his ass down on a couch and psychoanalyze him after he'd done a few rails, although, given the stories about him, he'd probably Socrates flip the script on me and diagnose me with 10 or so neuroses. The point is, if we can hold space for Freud's complicated legacy and also recognize all the work he did, maybe we can start doing the same for everybody else. Thanks for riding with me today. I know this was a short and sweet episode, but it felt like it's something I've been thinking about for a while. Drugs don't break people. Systems, institutions, stigmas, those break people. Okay, housekeeping. Few things I want to mention. If you listen to this podcast a lot, you'll notice the episodes are a little less frequent lately. I've got a lot of other projects going on in the background, plus some stuff in prison, and I'm doing a lot of writing right now for upcoming projects as well. But we're also trying to get some other projects going that feel like the culmination of where this podcast has been heading for a long time. So this podcast has always been about the war on drugs and the stigmas that come from that war, and how the lives of drug users are negatively impacted from almost every angle by the way we think about them and treat them. But I've realized of late, as many of you have heard in some of the episodes about religious trauma, that this is way bigger than just drugs, and I've actually found myself wanting to talk about that aspect of it a lot more. I know some of you love this, and some of you are annoyed by this, but I really think there is a deep connection that needs to be exposed between religious, dogmatic beliefs, religious trauma, and addiction. And I think that drugs is just one little piece of the problems people often develop when they're raised in cultures that teach them a form of religion that's toxic, and they never acknowledge it. So on one front, my wife and I have been talking a lot about kicking off a podcast where we talk about our journey from Christianity to atheism. We were already married at the time. It was really difficult for us because I started to deconstruct first, and honestly, she's told me that for a while, she was terrified we were going to have to get divorced. And then since then, we both feel like we've had the majority of our spiritual network, our religious support group, completely abandon us. And that's forced us to, first of all, grieve that loss, because we were really Christians for 35 years of our life, and we really meant it. We built those relationships, and they were important to us, and now those people treat us as if we're insincere, as if we're evil, as if we're lying about our inability to believe. So that's on one front, and we're kicking that idea around. Feel free to let me know what you think. But on another front, continuing this work on drugs, incarceration, stigma, and stereotype, I'm currently seeking a grant to try to put together a podcast where we talk to people who have either previously been addicted, previously been incarcerated, or both, and we try to get to the bottom of what their experience was really like, and to put a positive light on some of the negative stereotypes about both prison and addiction that are common in our culture. So I don't think this podcast will go away, but I just wanted to let those of you who have reached out over the last few months know that everything's fine. If anything, I have too much going on, and I appreciate your concern. All right, that's it for now. Love yourselves and the addicted people in your life. I'm Ben Boyce.